Hello, I'm Lisa Hayward with the University of Washington Interdisciplinary Center for Exposures, Diseases, Genomics, and Environment. Today I'm recording the third in a three-part series on science communication. And the first was on using accessible language. The second was on finding and refining a main message. Today's is on narrativity, which we'll define in a little while. If you're interested in the first two trainings, they're available as recordings using QR codes at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to start today by telling a little story about a man named Randy Olson, shown here. Back in the 80s, Randy Olson was a PhD student at Harvard studying marine biology. He graduated, did a postdoc at Harvard, traveled to beautiful tropical remote places to do field work, had a great time, ended up getting a tenured position at the University of New Hampshire, where he had graduate students and undergraduates and grants and a lab and field work and everything he thought he'd always wanted back when he was an undergraduate. But it wasn't quite feeling right for him. So at the age of 38, he packed up, left his job, moved across the country, and enrolled in film school. One of his first classes there was by an acting teacher who'd been recommended to him by a friend. And according to Randy Olson, she just tore him apart. She got him up in front of his peers, most of whom were much younger than him, and just humiliated him, insulted him, was just merciless. He ended up having this kind of dark hour of the soul and had to reevaluate his education, which he'd always considered to be a primary asset, but was now a liability in this new context. Because as a scientist, he was trained to be objective always and highly accurate. And that came at a cost to his ability to engage with a broader audience. That was what his teacher had become enraged about. And it led him to commit not only to being a better communicator himself, but also to helping other scientists become better communicators. This was important, as he put it, because with the knowledge of science, we can solve resource limitations, cure diseases, and make society work happily, but only if people can figure out what in the world scientists are talking about and why they should care. This is from his book, Don't Be Such a Scientist, which he wrote as kind of a manual to help scientists become better communicators. It's a great book. One of his areas of emphasis is on storytelling, same with Hollywood in general. Storytelling is a huge piece of effective communication. And why is that so potent? Well, through most of our evolutionary history, we had storytelling as our primary form of communication. It was how we took in information, it was how we stored it, and how we repeated it back to others. So we got very good at processing information in the form of story. It was critical to survival. Um, these days, we can use a neuroscience lens to look at our reaction to storytelling. So this shows there's a lot going on in this figure. It shows the inner subject correlation of people being shown different clips of different film. And the inner subject correlation is the similarity between the patterns of brain activity among these different study participants. So what you see is that in green here in this graph is the inner subject correlation of people watching Alfred Hitchcock. And you can contrast that with the inner subject correlation of people watching people wandering around randomly in a park, Washington Square Park. So there's high plot, no plot. And then somewhere in the middle, there's Sergio Leone, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Larry David with Curb Your Enthusiasm. And you see that the more plot there is, the more the intersubject correlation. And that's really where we want to be as science communicators, because that means that people are having the same experience, internal experience of a communication, taking away this similar messages. And that's where we want people to be. Certainly not in that walking in the park, idiosyncratic brain activity category over there. So, what do we mean by narrativity? It's the ability of an account to tell a meaningful story about the relationships between facts and or events. So, how strong are those relationships between the facts and the events in the thing that you're communicating? That's what we want to focus on. And we can break this down into different metrics. This is a paper done by some people here at University of Washington. They analyzed 732 scientific abstracts for measures of narrativity, and then they looked at the citation frequency of the papers, those abstracts. And they looked at settings, specifically narrative perspective, sensory language, conjunctions, connectivity, and appeal. So senses, do they elicit senses and emotions? Connectivity, the links between ideas. Conjunctions help with those, like and, but, or. Appeal is a moral or evaluative orientation, like things should be this way, would be some kind of appeal. The ones that are shown in bold here are the ones that correlated with citation frequency. And when they put them all together, they came up with an index of narrativity that they used here that correlated strongly with the impact factor of the journal, meaning the higher impact journals were likely to have the higher narrativity index in their papers. So narrativity is good for impact. We can see how they put it. Our results reveal that at least among the set of peer-reviewed climate change literature included in our data set, articles featuring more narrative writing styles are more often cited. They went on to say, among the variables we tested, connectedness, or the extent to which sentences are logically related, has the greatest positive influence. Another paper looked at a similar thing, had more metrics of narrativity, which they called writing with the reader in mind. Also looked at number of citations. And this is what they measured, and some of these are identical to what you saw before, but word count, setting, narrator, conjunctions, signposts, which is providing a clear structure or order for ideas, punctuation, consistent language, parallel phrasing. Then two things that countered the reading for the writer, the writing for a reader in mind. Acronyms and noun chunks, and hedging, or the use of qualifiers. Both of those can reduce the clarity of the meaning or dampen the confidence of the statements. Not good for the reader. They broke down their journals into different categories based on impact factor there. And they found that across the board, writing with the reader in mind led to more citations or was associated with more citations. And the higher the impact factor for the journal, the more impact the writing with the reader in mind had. So here's how they summarized. For instance, highly cited articles were short, used first-person narration, placed findings in context by providing a setting, linked ideas by using conjunctions, punctuation marks, and consistent terminology, and avoided excessive acronyms and awkward noun chunks. All good things to keep in mind when you write. They went on to say, science research is resource hungry, and we should be making the most of the resources we use by writing better. Hopefully you feel persuaded. So how do we create narrative structure within our communications? This was something I was dying to know for a long time, and I asked a lot of people in different fields, and many of them, most of them pointed me to this one template, the hero's journey. This is considered the template for communications historically going back for generations, cross-culturally. Disney, Pixar mastered this. This is really good stuff here. I was familiar with this because I'd been an English major way back in the day, but I still had no idea how to apply this to science communication. Because you look at this and you see there's three acts: the separation, the ordeal, and the unification. And there's all this stuff going on in the different acts, like a road of trials with enemies and allies, obstacles, the descent into the abyss, the ascent or magic flight, the rescue from without, the showdown or catharsis, climax, resurrection. These things weren't easy to identify in the science that I wanted to communicate. So I was really thrilled when I came across another book by Randy Olson called Houston, We Have a Narrative. And in it, he lays out not only this template, which he does use, he calls it his paragraph template, but also what he calls his sentence template, which he based on an insight from a documentary about the making of South Park that he happened to catch late one night. And he heard Trey Parker, one of the creators of South Park, talking about the process for improving a script. And he said they'd start out with something that invariably would just be a bunch of this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And he'd take it and he'd see how many ands he could replace with buts or therefores. And whenever he could replace one, then the script got better. That was his process, he said. So this was an aha moment for Randy Olson, and he used it to develop his and but therefore template, his sentence template for narrative. He credits also Frank Danielle for this. So how does this work? Well, basically the and, but, therefore are kind of like the three acts in the hero's journey. There's the first act, which is the beginning, where the facts get laid out and there's all the necessary information for the audience to comprehend the problem and hopefully to care. Kind of this is the setup. And then comes act two, the problem or the conflict gets presented. And this is kind of a hook that gets people to keep listening or keep reading, to hang in there to find out what the resolution is. And that resolution comes in the third act, the end, where you elaborate on a solution, an action, or a consequence. There's some resolution and conclusion provided. So that is great. And this is how Randy Olson uses his template. He says, you now have a tool to communicate science better, the and, but, therefore. And you know it's important work to do so. You know it's important to do so. But actually improving communication is a lot of work. So it's time to get to work. And Randy Olson knows the best way for people to get better at this is to do it and do it again and practice and work that muscle through repetition. So he runs a bunch of workshops for scientists where they can come and they can use this technique in their communication and they can use it again and get better over time. And we're going to do a little mini workshop of our own to get some practice ourselves. So this is a piece of text from the beginning of a paper that I found. And I want you to take some time to pause the recording, take some time, read through this, and see if you can identify the structure. What is the relationship between the ideas in this paragraph? Is it an and? Is it a but? Is it a therefore? Is it something altogether different? Do the best you can, and then you can start the recording again, and I'll share what I came up with, my take on it, and we can go from there. Okay, so good luck. Okay, so when I read through this, oops, when I read through this, I found that it had an and structure. And I use this as an example because I think this is really common. There's just a fact and a fact and a fact and a fact. And as scientists, we might not even have a huge problem with that. We might be used to processing information that way, but it does get, even for scientists, it does get a whole lot better if you can do a little extra work and develop the relationships among those ideas a little further. So now I want you to see if you can do what Trey Parker does and replace some of the ands with buts or therefores and see if you can make this better. Okay. Okay. Welcome back. And I already accidentally showed this. But this is the but that I identified. So in my mind, you've got this problem where there's a lot of people living on the permafrost. There's a lot of waste stored in the permafrost that's going to be really bad for health if it gets exposed. And we've got the thawing. It's all fine until you get the thawing. But I felt like the thawing was the but there. So thawing permafrost, temperatures already increased by more than 0.5 degrees Celsius. The surface layer that thaws each summer is deepening. All this introduces the conflict or the problem. And hopefully, we've all been made to care because we know there are a lot of people, 5 million people living up there on the permafrost. So then the therefore is calling on the policymakers to act, in my opinion. You could set this up so that it's really a call to action, and we're going to contact policymakers. Hopefully, it goes on to tell us how to do that. It could be one therefore that I pulled out of this paragraph. If I were to restructure this a little bit, I've taken away some of the detail, but just I've written it out this way. 5 million people live on circumpolar permafrost, within which are buried chemicals and industrial waste. This waste storage system has worked for decades, but now thawing permafrost poses a risk at a vast geographic scale. Therefore, it's critical we call on policymakers to act quickly while there's still time to avoid the worst impacts. It might be that there's a different therefore in the mind of the authors and they would write this differently, but the key is to have that relationship among the sentences, among the ideas. And you can build from there. You can add the detail back in, build from there as long as you maintain the right relationship among the ideas. So hopefully the next abstract that you do this with will be one that you've written yourself and you can do the exercise and make the writing better. And it'll be a practice that you take forward with you in your communication work. So I promised you the QR codes for the other two trainings. There's using accessible language and finding your message based on an exercise from Compass Online. If you have any questions or you want any further information, please reach out. I'm at lhayward@uw.edu. Thank you.